Okay, I need you to stay with me for this entire video because what I'm about to show you is something I still cannot believe happened. I traveled back in time, not to the 1800s, not to the Victorian era. I went all the way back to Tudor London, the year 1536, and honestly, the moment I arrived, I immediately regretted it. Imagine stepping out of a time machine expecting to see the London you know today, big buildings, cars, buses, people staring at their phones, and instead nothing. No traffic, no electricity, no modern buildings, no familiar sounds. Just horses, wooden carts, muddy streets. Smoke in the air, and thousands of people dressed like they had walked straight out of a history book. And the strangest part, nobody thought it was strange, because for them, this was completely normal. So welcome to the most dangerous, disgusting, fascinating, and unbelievable vlog I have ever made. Today, we are exploring London in the year 1536. And before we go any further, let me warn you, if you think history is boring, you are about to change your mind. The first thing I noticed was the smell, and I mean that in the worst possible way. There was mud everywhere, animals walking through the streets, waste being thrown into places it definitely shouldn't be, smoke coming from fires, and people packed together everywhere. London was crowded, very crowded. And there was one thing I quickly learned. You absolutely did not want to fall into the street, because there were no clean pavements like today. The roads were basically a mixture of mud, animal waste, water, food scraps, and whatever else people decided they didn't need anymore. I was walking extremely carefully. At one point, a horse came past me so close that I genuinely thought my time, traveling adventure, was about to end with me getting kicked by a Tudor horse. And nobody even reacted. People just carried on walking. There were merchants shouting about their goods, children running between people, animals making noise, carts moving through narrow streets, and traders trying to convince everyone that their products were the best. It felt chaotic. But somehow it worked. Well, mostly. And then I started looking at the people. This was Tudor England. King Henry VIII was on the throne. And trust me, his presence was impossible to ignore. Everyone knew who the king was. This wasn't a world where you could simply open your phone and search for the latest royal news. News traveled through people, through markets, through churches, through travelers, through rumors, and in 1536 there was plenty to talk about. Henry VIII had already broken away from the authority of the Pope in Rome. England was going through enormous religious and political changes. And then there was Anne Boleyn. By 1536, the entire royal situation was getting incredibly tense. And if you've watched anything about Tudor history, you already know that Henry VIII was not exactly famous for peaceful relationships. But standing there in London, knowing these events were actually happening around me, felt completely different. This wasn't a documentary anymore. This was real life. People around me didn't know they were living through history. To them, it was just Tuesday. And that's probably the strangest thing about traveling through time. We look at historical events and think of them as chapters in a textbook. But for the people living through them, it was their ordinary life. They had jobs, they had families, they had arguments. They fell in love, they got sick, they worried about money, they complained about the weather, they laughed, they ate, they slept, and they had absolutely no idea that hundreds of years later, people would still be talking about them. Now let's talk about food, because obviously I had to try Tudor London food. And this is where things became interesting. Bread was extremely important. Meat was available for people who could afford it, while poorer people depended heavily on grains, vegetables, soups, and whatever food they could get. There were markets everywhere. I saw people selling bread, fish, meat, vegetables, fruit, cheese, and all kinds of things. But here's the problem: there was no modern refrigeration. So keeping food fresh was a serious challenge. And hygiene. Let's just say, if you're watching this while eating lunch, maybe don't think about it too much. I tried some bread. Honestly, it wasn't terrible. Then I tried something that I was told was perfectly normal. I took one bite. I looked at the camera, and I thought, how did people survive this? But I wasn't going to give up. I came here for the full Tudor experience, so I kept going. And after a while, I started realizing something. People in 1536 were incredibly adaptable. They didn't have modern technology. They didn't have antibiotics. They didn't have supermarkets. They didn't have instant communication. But they knew how to survive in their environment. They understood their trades. They knew their local markets. They knew how to make clothes, tools, food, buildings, and almost everything else they needed. And honestly, that was impressive. Then I decided to explore the Thames. The River Thames was one of the most important parts of London. It wasn't just a pretty river. It was basically the city's highway. Boats were constantly moving goods and people. You could see merchants, workers, sailors, fishermen, and all kinds of activity along the river. And standing there, watching the Thames in 1536 was one of the most incredible moments of this entire journey, because I knew that the same river would still be flowing hundreds of years later. The city would change, the buildings would change, the people would change, but the river would remain. And then I saw something that reminded me just how different this world was. A group of people gathered together. They were talking about politics, and one name kept coming up: Henry. Everyone was talking about the king, but people were careful, because criticizing powerful people could be dangerous. In our world, we can complain about politicians online, make jokes, post videos, and move on. In Tudor England, you had to be much more careful about what you said and who heard you. Words could have consequences, and that made me realize something. Freedom isn't something you appreciate until you imagine living without it. I continued walking through the city. The buildings were mostly timber frame. The streets were narrow. There were shops and homes packed closely together, and everywhere I looked, there was movement. London was alive. Messy, noisy, crowded, smoky but alive. Then I came across something that made the atmosphere change completely. A church. Religion was everywhere. Church bells, religious symbols, prayers, people discussing faith. But England was going through a major religious transformation. Henry VIII's break with Rome had changed the country dramatically. Monasteries were being dissolved. Church property was being taken, and people were living through a period of enormous uncertainty. Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that something you believed had been part of your world forever was suddenly being changed by the government. That's the kind of world this was. And while all of this was happening, ordinary people were simply trying to get through the day. That really stayed with me, because history often focuses on kings and queens. But most people in Tudor London were not kings or queens. They were workers, shopkeepers, craftsmen, sailors, farmers, servants, parents, children, people whose names were never recorded in history books. But without them, London wouldn't have existed. Then came the part of my journey that I was honestly nervous about: night. If you think London today can be creepy at night, imagine London in 1536. There were no streetlights, no bright shop windows, no headlights, no phones. Once the sun went down, darkness took over. I was walking through the streets, and suddenly everything felt different. During the day, the city was loud. At night, it became mysterious. You could hear footsteps, horses, voices coming from inside buildings, the occasional shout somewhere in the distance. And I kept thinking, I really should have brought a flashlight. Then I remembered flashlights haven't been invented yet. Great. So I decided to head somewhere safer. And while walking, I started thinking about how much we take for granted. We turn on a light without thinking. We open a refrigerator. We call someone instantly. We travel hundreds of miles in a few hours. We can learn almost anything with a few taps on a screen. A person in 1536 couldn't imagine any of this, and yet they probably looked at their own technology and thought it was amazing. Their ships, their printing presses, their clocks, their weapons, their buildings, their ability to communicate across distances. Every generation thinks its world is normal until another generation arrives. And that's when this whole journey started feeling less like a history lesson and more like a lesson about ourselves. Eventually, I reached the point where I knew I couldn't stay much longer. I'd been walking through Tudor London for what felt like an entire lifetime. I had seen the markets, the Thames, the churches, the streets, the people, the food, the chaos, and I had one final thought. If I could bring just one person from 1536 into the present day, what would I show them first? A car, an airplane, a smartphone, the internet, London itself. Honestly, I think I'd show them a modern supermarket. Because imagine walking into a place where thousands of different foods are available in one building, and they're all just sitting there. Then I'd show them a modern hospital and explain that diseases and injuries that once killed huge numbers of people can now often be treated. Then I'd show them an airplane, and I'd tell them, you can cross an ocean in hours. I think their mind would completely explode. But then I'd ask them something too. I'd ask, what did your world have that ours has lost? Because progress isn't always simple. They had slower lives. They had fewer choices. They faced terrible dangers. But they also lived without social media, constant notifications, endless emails, and the pressure to be available every second of the day. Maybe they had something we desperately need: silence, time, community, and the ability to simply exist without documenting every moment. Maybe traveling through history isn't just about seeing the past. Maybe it's about looking at the present differently. And then it was time to go home. I found my way back to the place where my journey began. I looked around one final time. Tudor London was still moving. People were shouting. Horses were walking. The Thames was flowing. Smoke was rising into the sky. Somewhere, a bell was ringing, and I suddenly realized something. Nobody there knew that their world would disappear. They didn't know that London would eventually become one of the greatest cities on earth. They didn't know that their clothes, homes, streets, kings, queens, arguments, and everyday lives would become history. They were simply living. And maybe that's the biggest lesson I can take from this journey. We are doing the same thing right now. One day, someone will look back at our world. They'll see our buildings, our technology, our clothes, our cars, our phones, our strange habits. And they'll probably laugh at some of the things we think are completely normal. Just like we laugh at some things from Tudor England. So if you ever feel like your ordinary day doesn't matter, remember, history is made of ordinary days. And maybe the most important moments aren't the ones we recognize immediately. Maybe they're the ones we don't realize are important until hundreds of years later. And that brings me to the end of my journey through Tudor London. I survived the mud. I survived the food. I survived the horses. I survived the darkness. And somehow I survived 1536. But before I leave you, I want you to imagine something. If you had the chance to travel through time for just 24 hours, would you go to Tudor London? Would you visit ancient Rome? Would you see the pyramids being built? Would you meet a famous historical figure? Or would you travel into the future? Tell me in the comments, because I genuinely want to know where you would go. And if you enjoyed coming with me on this completely insane journey through Tudor London, don't just leave yet. Hit that like button, because it tells me you want more time, travel adventures. Share this video with someone who loves history, mysteries, or just enjoys watching me make questionable decisions in extremely dangerous centuries. And of course, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because who knows where we're going next. Maybe ancient Rome, maybe medieval Paris, maybe the future. Or maybe I accidentally traveled to the wrong century again. Either way, I'll see you in the next adventure. Until then, keep questioning history, keep exploring, and never trust a Tudor food vendor. Thanks for watching.